Yeah, in our next lecture today, we'll discuss classes and objects. Now in Java, every program that we write that is in the form of a class. Now we say that class is a framework on which we need to base our programs on. So just as we can define a class called student, and within the class we can define what parameters you require to essentially describe a student. So we can say we require a first name, we require last name, we require what class he is studying. Whatever parameters we require to identify a student, we can describe within the class. And then we can even define some methods within the class. Suppose we can say void progress, in which we can describe what parameters define the progress of the student. So this is basically a framework. A class is basically a framework on which we need to work on in making our programs and in defining our programs. So these are the variables in the class, which we say they are the property of the class, and these are the methods which we say they define the behavior of the class. The class in itself, it is basically a structure on which we need to work on. So in itself the class is not doing anything, whereas everything on the behalf of the class we have to do through the objects. So objects we define, they are the functional part of the class. So everything on part of the class is done by the objects. So how essentially do we create an object of a class? We say student, create any reference, any name, say student SS. Just put main here. So in case I write student SS, then I'm not essentially creating an object of class student. I'm just creating a reference SS which is of type student class. So as of now this SS does not point to any object, and we cannot use this as an object. So how essentially does it become an object or a reference to an object? We'll say SS is equal to new student, or I can club both of the statements together and say student SS is equal to new student. Now what essentially are the different parameters? I'll just try to explain. Suppose we have a class, I say A, and suppose we have a variable called this class say X, and initialize a value called to 10, and we close the structure of the class. Now to declare an object of this class, we'll say A any reference is equal to new, and this is A. So we'll just analyze what different parts of this declaration are. Now this is the type of the object. So this essentially means that A1 belongs to type class A. Now this A1 is the reference to the object. Now in C++ we had pointers to the object, but in Java we have reference to the object, which is an indirect way of giving the location of the object. It is no direct pointer to the memory location where we have data of the object. So this is a reference to the object, and now we'll just discuss what essentially is reference to the object. This is an operator to assign memory, and the last, in case you have an idea, this is a call to the constructor. I hope the statement is clear. However, we need to just focus on the reference to the object. Now in case of Java, we access the object. Now this is the object, and this is the reference to the object. So in case we need to access any data related to any object, the only way to access that is through the reference to the object. So because we do everything on part of the object through the reference, so sometimes we refer this reference as the object. However, the object is at a different location as compared to the reference. The reference is at an altogether different location, but the only link between these two is that reference is the only way that we can approach the object and manipulate the object. So in case we need to make any changes to this data, suppose we take this example, as we write this line, we create a memory location and we have a value 10 stored at that location. So the reference, they are stored on the stack, and all the object data, this is stored on the heap. So I'll say this, as we write this line, we have an entry A1 which points to some data on the heap, which is associated when you write this line. So what essentially will this mean? We can see it in two parts. As you write A1 and you do not assign it with a new operator, so what this will do is, it will create a reference on the stack, but there will be no data on the heap. I'll just erase this. So this line will essentially create a reference on the stack, but beyond that there's nothing in picture except for the reference on the stack. Now as soon as I write A1 is equal to new A, so there is some data on the heap which is created by the new operator, and this reference A1 then gets attached to this data. So it is after this line that you have a pointing of this reference to some object. Before this reference has no attachment with any object, and you cannot manipulate as if this is an object. So this is just a reference here, but now becomes a pointer to an object once you assign some object to this reference. So a very simple example for a reference and an object we can take is, suppose we have a TV which operates as the object, and you have a remote which stands for the reference, and in our program, in case it wants to operate on this TV as an object, it needs to operate through this remote, which in fact stands for the reference. So anything we need to manipulate with the object, we need to do through the reference. So reference is the one and only way to reach out to an object. In case we don't have any reference to an object, we cannot reach out to this object. Suppose I say a1 equal to null. So by writing null, what I have essentially done is I have closed this pointing. So now this data is not associated with any reference, so the user cannot access this data as there is no reference which points to this data. So after beyond this line, a1, this object cannot be used and it is now ready for garbage collection. So whenever the memory goes short, system will remove this data and have memory freed from the heap. So we'll come back to, so we'll just extend this, just clear it. So in continuation of our earlier discussion, suppose I say a1 is equal to new a, I create a new object a1 referring to some object, and in case I make another reference and I say a2 is equal to a1. So this essentially means I am assigning the object which is referred by a1 to a reference which is a2. So we have another reference which is now also pointing to the same object that we had earlier referenced by a1. So in case we refer anything to null, suppose we say a1 is equal to null. So what essentially this means that we are wiping out this link between the object and the reference. So a1 is now no longer attached with this object, but as we have a2 which is attached to this object, we still have access to the data of this object through a2 reference. However, in case we also make a2 null, then we have no way to access to this object, and this object will now be ready for garbage collection. So the rule for garbage collection is as long as any object has at least one reference attached to it, it will not be garbage collected, and as long as all the references to the object they are removed, so we can reclaim that memory space which is taken up by that object. So in effect, the reference to the object is basically the one and only way to reach to the object. However, the reference is a distinct identity. The object is a space where the data related to the object, the data which is related is stored, and the reference is pointing to that data, and we can access to that data through the reference. So as we have created an object here, I'll just create a simple example. I'll say int marks is equal to 10. Suppose I create a new student and I say that marks of this student are 40, and I create another student S2 and I say the marks of this student are 50. There's a slight mistake here. So what I can do is I can assign this S2 to this SS. So what this will do is the object that we were referencing with S2 is now being referenced by SS also, and that we can see when we print out ss dot marks. So ss dot marks is 50, which was earlier s2 dot marks. So now s2 dot marks is same as ss dot marks, and in case I mark this s2 as null, still I can reference that object through ss. Again I get 50, and in case I now mark ss as null, so now both the pointers to the object, they are null. So now if I try to access the marks of that object, I'll get a null pointer exception. So this null pointer, it points that this reference ss has now relation to no object, and so it has no data to pick up from. So this is basically a null pointer exception, wherein this reference has no pointing to any object. So I hope this clears classes and objects concept, and next lecture we'll move on to instance and static variables.